So she'll be managing, and corresponding with all of you who are in the Savannah area. I was in the future, we'll be hosting these orientations for Savannah, but since she is new, I wanted to give her opportunity to attend one. So we're going to record it. I've had trouble sharing a Teams recording. I'm talking to our IT about how to do that. So if you have people who wanted to join or that you want to share it with, I'm going to try to get a version of this that you can share. But I'm also hosting another one on November 7th, which is a Sunday afternoon, I think 3 o'clock. So if you know people that you'd like to come, they can come to that one. All right. Let's see. There we go. So just to start with a little bit about Inspiritus, most of you already know a little bit about Inspiritus because you have expressed an interest in volunteering. But I just want to go over it anyway. So our mission is to, guide individuals and families on a path from surviving to thriving. So we're taking families who, are arriving in different places, or because we work with people who are in, we have refugee and immigrant services, we have disability services, disaster response, and children and family services. Those are different departments within Inspiritus. And our mission for all of these departments is to take someone, a family or individual, and help walk them along the path from surviving to thriving. Everything that we do here in this department is refugee and immigrant services. So there's not really an overlap between departments other than like a monthly staff meeting where we get to hear about what's going on and other programs, highlights, events, things like that. So tonight we were going to specifically talk about refugee and immigrant services and what we do with those programs. So Inspiritus works in partnership with the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services. There's 9 refugee resettlement agencies that in the U.S. And of those 9, 4 of them are operating in the Atlanta area. And of the 4 in an Atlanta area and in Georgia, Inspiritus is the only one that's resettling refugees outside of the Atlanta area in Georgia, and that's in Savannah. But Inspiritus is not part of the 9. Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services is. So we are under their umbrella. We are an office or an affiliate under what we call LIRS. And you'll find LIRS working in other states as well. So we're welcoming refugees from around the world. People often ask me, where are people coming from? Well, with the recent Afghan crisis, which I'm going to spend a lot of my time tonight talking about, and talking about the differences between refugees and our Afghans who have arrived. But when you ask me that, it's sometimes hard to answer because we are resettling refugees from all around the world. And depending on the year, the U.S. is called the presidential determination. So the president determines which countries we're going to focus on providing relief as the U.S. And so I normally will have those areas, but we aren't confident which countries that we're going to receive people from really until we start resettling them. So Inspiritus welcomes and serves refugees and asylees. I've added the Afghan immigrants and unaccompanied immigrant children. Our unaccompanied immigrant children, I'll talk about a little bit later. It's a part of our immigrant and refugee services, but it's kind of a smaller piece of the pie that we don't have a ton of volunteer involvement with, but we do some. So I'll cover that a little bit later. All right, so tonight, though, I want you to walk away with an understanding of who refugees are, what their resettlement process looks like, and also, because of the recent crisis, the new Afghan Placement Assistance Program. It's called the APA program. So if you look at this graphic here, you'll see that people are, forcibly displaced all over the world. I like to use this graphic to help people understand the difference between refugees, and you can see the top number, or the blue, the 20.7 million refugees under the UNHCR's mandate, which is the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, versus the green bar where it shows internally displaced persons. So in order to become a refugee, actually I'm going to skip. You have to have fled your home country because of fear or persecution, either been persecuted or fear of persecution. There's only 5 reasons for persecution that are valid to qualify for refugee status. So refugee is a status. So our Afghans who are coming to the US are not refugees. They do not qualify as refugees. They're actually under a humanitarian parolee status, a visa status, but let me explain why. So a refugee is someone who has had to flee their country. They have to have crossed an international border because of persecution or fear of persecution. And the persecution has to be for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, which often includes gender-based violence and homosexuality, or political opinion. So you have to have crossed an international border, and you have to have proof that you've been persecuted or had valid fear, provable fear of being persecuted for one of these reasons in order to qualify for refugee status. So let me go back. If you have fled your area, your state, your territory, because you've been persecuted, but you didn't cross an international border, you're considered an internally displaced person. So you cannot qualify as a refugee until you've crossed an international border. You also, if you flee your country or state, territory, and cross an international border because of economic turmoil or natural disaster, a tsunami, a mudslide, an earthquake, you flee your country because of that, you can't qualify as a refugee. So our Afghans were not able to qualify for refugee status because they did not flee Afghanistan into a secondary country to apply for refugee status there. The only thing the US does in regards to refugees is called third country resettlement, because you have your home country, they flee to a secondary country where they apply for refugee status. And then the US is one of 28 countries that offers third country resettlement, where we invite refugees to come to the US to resettle here. The only refugees coming to the US on refugee status are coming at the invitation of our government to resettle here. And less than 1% of refugees make it through that process to a third country resettlement. 99% of refugees will end up either living in a refugee camp, living in their secondary country, some going back to their first country if things settle down or the government changes and they're able to. But the majority of people are not resettled into a third country. The average stay in a refugee camp is 18 years. So this entire process to qualify as a refugee takes about 12 to 14 months. Actually, we'll get into that a little bit later. So the UNHCR, there we go, less than 1% of the world's refugees are ever resettled. The UNHCR focuses on the most vulnerable refugees, so women and girls at risk, survivors of violence and torture, family reunification, medical needs, and children at risk. One of the things I love about America, and that list is short, but one of the things that I love is that the US focuses on providing relief and resettlement to people with high medical needs, because we are such a resource-rich country here in regards to medical resources. So we will accept people who have physical, mental disabilities or illnesses that can receive treatment here in the US that they may not have been able to receive elsewhere. An example of that, so story number 1, I worked with a family from, I believe they were from Sudan in Africa, and it was a woman who had 6 children, and or several children, I think there were 5 or 6, and she had a 5-year-old who was severely disabled physically and unable to walk or eat on their own, and she constantly cared for that child every day. Every single day, she is providing, nutrition and caring for the hygiene of this child. The other kids, when they got here, were able to go to school. Her husband was able to get a job, and she was essentially stuck at home managing and caring for this child. So we were able to get her into Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, or the child seen by Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, get the child fitted for a wheelchair, a feeding tube put in so that she didn't have to constantly be feeding the child. Ultimately, the child was able to get connected to a bus and taken to school with teachers who are, educated and specialized in caring for kids with severe physical disabilities. And the mom was able to go to work. And this was completely life-changing for her, because that was the first time in that child's life that she's had an identity outside of being the caretaker for the child. For the first time in 5 years, she was able to go to work, feel like she was contributing to her family, be socialized with other adults, and not feel like she was only caring for one of her many children. It was just a really beautiful thing to see how the entire family was changed because of what we were able to provide for that one child, but then specifically the mom. So this was updated in June 2021. You'll notice before Afghan crisis. So at that point, 2.6 million, 11% of our clients came from Afghanistan, which I think that is pretty significantly changed. But we're seeing a lot of people from Syria, Myanmar, and South Sudan. Democratic Republic of Congo is in that others. This kind of gives you an idea of where we're seeing people from. Okay, so I was working on this table and it's not organized. I didn't get it organized as well as I wanted to before tonight, but I kind of wanted to give you an overview of what resettlement has looked like in the last, 5 or 6 years. So in 2016, I mentioned the presidential determination. So the president that year was President Obama, and he set the ceiling. Actually, I think it was higher. I think it was like around 750 to 800,000. But anyway, we resettled 604 refugees in Atlanta, 122 in Savannah, which gave us a total of 726. The next year, you see 416 in Atlanta, 88 in Savannah, which was a total of 504. This kind of gives you an average of what life looked like. We were resettling between 500, to 750 refugees and immigrants on average. And then over the course of President Trump's administration, he chose to severely limit and restrict the number of refugees and immigrants coming into the country, lay off a lot, cut the funding to a lot of resettlement programs, lay off a lot of people on the government level. And so we went down to 115 in Atlanta and 32 in Savannah. So you can see that number dropped significantly. And then even in 2021, still really low, specifically because of the pandemic, 108, 25, so a total 130. You see FYI, we run off of a fiscal year. So our fiscal year starts October 1st. It is October 26th. So in the past 25 days, we've resettled 12 refugees in Atlanta, 53 Afghans, 8 refugees in Savannah, 14 Afghans, for a total of 86 people in 26 days. If you look again back to FY21, we resettled a total of 133 in the entire year. Now, granted, that was a low year, that low numbers, but from FY18 to 21, we were averaging around 150, and we're already at 86 in the first 26 days. So we're busy. We're increasing our staff, we're ramping up, we're hiring, we've got lots of job postings. We're looking for volunteers, we're recruiting volunteers and church sponsors, and faith partners, and we really do need you guys, because at these numbers, and with us still being in a staffing shortage across the U.S., it's so helpful to have volunteers to come alongside families and walk with them through their adjustment period. It's so helpful to have volunteers to call and say, can you take them to this appointment? Can you help us set up an apartment? Do you mind going to the grocery store? There's all these things that are real practical, tangible things that take off, a load on our staff. All right, so I talked about that. So let's talk about, this is specifically for refugees. And after we get through this, I'll go back to the APA, Afghan Placement Assistance Program. For refugees, I told you, you leave your home country because of persecution or fear of persecution. You enter into a secondary country, you've crossed the international border, you enter into a secondary country, you register with the UNHCR, that's the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, that's the international governing body for refugees. You go through that resettlement processing, interviews and security screenings. That takes, like I said, about 12 to 14 months. They're interviewing every single person in the family separately. They're doing security checks. They're making sure their stories line up. They're really trying to see whether you have any ties to militant groups or anything that would be a threat to our security. If you are approved, you get what's called conditional approval, or you gain refugee status under the UNHCR. And then the US does their own screenings. And that phrase, you know, if you want it done right, do it yourself. The US government really operates under that. So they go and do all of their own security screenings again, as if it had not been done. There's biometric checks, there's health screenings, again, with background checks, security checks, things like that. That takes about a year. Okay, so you've got those things done. Congratulations, you qualify as a refugee. And you qualify to come to the U.S. now, and they usually tell refugees usually get around a month's notice with where they're going to in the U.S. Like get the state and city. They do something what they call a cultural orientation, where they talk about basics about the U.S. And this is where I like to explain and remind you that 28 countries do refugee resettlement. And up until this point, a refugee doesn't know what country they're going to. So I think that's important to note that, you know, if there's fear associated with if a refugee is going to come and harm the U.S., anyone can. I mean, we've had more, mass shootings and things like that were done by American-born than foreign-born. So anyone with any mental health issues certainly could snap. But if you had, that was your goal, that was your intention, the refugee route is not the route to go. There are a lot better, more efficient, quicker ways to get into the U.S. If that's your goal, than trying to go through the refugee route, because you could end up in one of 28 countries. It could take you over 18 years to accomplish this goal. It's just really not the path you want to take if harming America is your intention. So they get, and then also I'll say you can't start your journey of learning English knowing you're going to come to America, right? We can't expect them to know the languages of all the 28 countries. So you get into German and French and Italian and all the other countries. So a lot of people are like, well, if they came here, they need to know our language. But ideally, yes, and they will start learning it, but they weren't given enough information or enough leeway to learn an entire language before they get here. So they may know some English, especially if there was a school established in the refugee camp and it spoke English or British English, then they may have learned some language in the camp. And again, I'm speaking specifically to refugees. I'll cover Afghans in a minute. So you find out you're coming to the US, congratulations, welcome. We go to the airport, we receive them when they arrive, welcome to America. We're so happy that you're here. All right, so let me talk about, before I move on, of what we do, because from here on out, it's the same for refugees and our Afghans. The APA program and the Afghan crisis was a rescue effort, right? Like this happened overnight. And the U.S. went in and performed a rescue effort along with several other countries. So our Afghan families had established lives. They had careers. A lot of them had drivers and servants and, were engineers and lawyers and doctors. We've gotten people with all kinds of careers who, studied and went to school and college and got their masters and got degrees in order to become the person that they wanted to become and have the career that they were working towards. And overnight, all of that was taken from them and left behind. So if you're working with our Afghan clients, I think it's important to note these are not poor people who won a lottery ticket and are pursuing the American dream. They do not see it that way at all. They are not just so excited that they got to be in America. They are still grieving. They're still processing the trauma that they experienced and the fact that they were taken from their home, that they had to flee their home. And so they have all kinds of emotional, processing to do. We're seeing a lot of anger. A lot of people are angry. They're angry. They're expressing their anger at an agency, at us. But really, that's a secondary emotion. Their first emotion is grief and sadness that this happened and that they were forced to not be where they want to be, which is their home. There's a lot of fear. They have family back home. People were separated in this process. I also want to help explain that this was very chaotic. If you saw any of the news coverage, people were separated from their families in the process and are attempting to be reunited now. But they were ended up, so what happened was once they boarded a plane in Afghanistan, they were taken to a foreign military base in Germany and Italy and France and done initial screening there. They still had to go through security screening. They still had to go through health screenings. And they did that there in these foreign bases. Those that were approved to come to the U.S. were then brought here to military bases in the U.S., all over the U.S. In that process, some families were separated. So we have families that are at different military bases. I didn't understand that or know that until I went to the airport the other day to pick up a father and son. I, on paper, was told that is a father and a 12-year-old son. There's no additional family members. They don't know anyone in Atlanta. They don't have any family in Atlanta. They don't have any friends. They're what we call a free case. Free meaning not connected. And I think it's important to note, and the reason I wanted to go over both is that the refugee process is a well-oiled machine. We've been doing this since 1981. So when we're resettling our refugees, it's organized, it's thorough, we know what to expect, we understand the process, there is a process. When we're working with APAs, it is the opposite of that. It is building a plane while it's in the air. And so much so that initially, they didn't have access to resources like social services, like food stamps and refugee Medicaid and all of that. And then all of a sudden they did. At first, they were free to go as soon as they had finished their screenings on base. Then there was a 21-day quarantine. So it's kind of been changing a lot. I think at this point in this stage, in the process, we've made a lot of progress. I feel really comfortable and really good about the information I'm giving you today and your involvement at this point. The people that I was talking to 6 weeks ago, it was like, everything's changing. I don't know. I'll let you know. But it's getting more organized. I just think it's helpful for you to understand that that's what they've been experiencing. A lot of transition, a lot of confusion, a lot of people who are in authority but don't actually have information. So going back to the father and son, I pick them up at the airport, and I get there and I notice that there is a group of men also there to receive this man. I was told that he had no connections here in Atlanta. He does. He has cousins here who've been here for a couple of years. And when he came off the plane, he, I'll say first he wept, which is very uncommon for with our refugee clients. They're very stoic. They might have sensory overload. They might be exhausted, but they generally don't show emotion. And the men specifically don't show emotion. And so this man just wept. And he told me that his sister was supposed to be coming the next day with his other children, that his female children, his daughters, had been sent with his sister, and he had his son. I had no idea. I didn't know of a sister coming the next day. We didn't have flight information for that. I didn't know he had a sister or extra children. And so all I was able to say is go sleep, eat, we'll get information tomorrow. Like for tonight, just go to sleep. So we found out that his sister was being resettled through another agency. I told you we have 4 here in the Atlanta area. We all work together very closely, very well. So we called around and found out who they were being resettled with. And we had identified housing for 2. but now we needed housing for 6. So that was another little logistical hiccup that we had to figure out. And but we were able to get them together, reunite them. It was really beautiful. So I just think it's important for you to know that you might come across this where people are talking about other family members or wanting to bring their family members. We have some, someone helping with immigration, but there's no guarantee, and that will take it would take years for them to bring additional family. Not that it can't happen, but it will take a long time. So I just wanted to explain the differences between refugees and our what we call APA. Okay, so what does Inspiritus do? And I think this is really good for you to know. Volunteers need to understand that Inspiritus is responsible for a list of services. We are required to provide these services. Volunteers are allowed to provide these or help with any of these things or do it instead of a caseworker, but the buck stops with us. Ultimately, we're responsible. We are the ones going to make sure that what needs to happen happens. So if you're involved with a family and you want to help with anything, you're welcome to, but you don't need to feel like it is your team's responsibility or your responsibility to do these things. So we're identifying affordable housing, which is really challenging right now. So plug for if you know anyone that is a landlord or has a private property that is willing to rent. We're looking for affordable housing. The challenge there is that we have relationships with leasing agents and apartment complexes that we work with, but they're full. And our refugees and our APAs, they don't have a work history here in the States to show. So we can make sure they have the deposit. We're helping them find a job, which I'll go into. They have background screenings, but they don't have a social security number yet. And so they can't apply for the background screening that like a traditional one that a leasing agent wants to run. So oftentimes people, even affordable housing you might identify in your area, they won't work with refugees or immigrants because of those barriers. So that's one of the things we're doing, that we're finding affordable housing. We're accepting furniture donations. Right now, I think we're full in both areas just because everybody wanted to donate when it was on the news. But we're required to provide certain housing items in their apartment. And so we'd like to get those things donated, because if not, we have to take what they have initial, I'll go over welcome money, and we have to spend that to make sure that they have the items that we're required to provide. We go to the airport and pick them up. We provide a hot meal. I do that because it's not actually hot usually by the time they eat it. But what that means is we don't want people who've been flying, generally for refugees, they've been flying for days. They've been traveling from that secondary country to the US. And so they're tired, they're jet lagged, they're sensory overload. We don't want them figuring out American appliances, trying to go to the grocery store, figure out currency, all that. So we make sure they have a meal that's been prepared, a prepared meal from their culture and their country for them to eat at whatever point. We do the same things for APAs. We don't, again, want them having to cook as soon as they get here. So we have a meal. We usually go to a restaurant and pick that up. So we're making sure we're giving them a culturally appropriate meal. And then we do a safety orientation, make sure they know how to use a fire extinguisher, how to lock their door, their fire escape route, things like that. And then we do a 24-hour visit. That doesn't mean we're there for 24 hours. That means the next day we go back and we talk to them about, a caseworker will go back and explain to them, here's the process, here's what you're going to be doing, here's when you'll see me, here's what you can expect from me, things like that. Okay, then in the first 30 days, we create a service plan. What does the family need? What is their physical health? What are their mental health? What housing issues do they have? Extras are like what concerns the family brings up. Then we're giving them a culture orientation. This is a series of around 4 classes, about 4 hours a class. We cover everything in orientation, from hygiene to how to treat your kids in public. We talk about, showing up to work on time and ready to work. We talk about your address. When you call 911, that you can ask for an ambulance, police, or fire department. We talk about how, cleaning products for your home, going back to hygiene. Body odor is typical in a lot of countries. It's just a normal part of life. In the US, if you smell bad, people treat you differently. So we need people to understand that you have to shower regularly. And even deodorant is different in different countries. You've got spray, you've got the roller ball, you've got, we most often use the bar. And I'll tell you, I was actually in the home of a brother and sister. They were like in their 30s, from a very westernized culture. I actually believe they were from Afghanistan or Iraq. And I used their restroom while I was there, and I saw that their deodorant stick, like that you would roll up, was in their shower. And so I didn't have a relationship with them, so I went back to their caseworker and was like, hey, I think they might be using this for soap. And sure enough, they thought that was soap, not deodorant. And here was a very westernized, brother and sister. They read English, but just somehow they had missed that was not soap. Also, I really wish someone would create soap that you roll up like that. Wouldn't slip out of your hands. It wouldn't slip off so anybody wants to do that, let me know. So we talk about all of that in cultural orientation. I love for volunteers to kind of help reinforce what is taught. We can share with you the curriculum if you want, but it's just helpful. I often say volunteers are really the first eyes, because our caseworkers can't be visiting every family all the time or even every week, right? But a volunteer can go in and see concerns or see this is another example I give that I never realized until I started working with immigrants, is that somehow I just inherently know that if I go into the grocery store and I go down an aisle, like a center aisle, not, you're outside of the store refrigerated section, and I take something off the shelf and I go home and I open it, I just know that I now need to put that in a refrigerator in cold storage, not back on the shelf where I bought it from. Refrigerate after opening, right? We just somehow know what things you refrigerate after opening. But if you don't refrigerate those things in your country and you don't read English, then you might see in their home things that are left out that are going to spoil. In a lot of countries, milk is not refrigerated. And so, just helping people understand what things go in the refrigerator, making sure they understand that you have to take your trash out, that we have collective garbage disposal here in the US. You're not burning it, you're not dumping it in the ditch, things like that. All right, so really exciting news. Our Afghans are also now eligible for food stamps, what we call refugee Medicaid, RCAs or refugee cash assistance. All the programs that our refugees are eligible for, they have to apply for those. So there is some delay or a gap between their arrival and when they get their EBT card. So we use donations and funds from donors and faith partners to help provide their meals and things like that until they get their EBT card, food stamps. The Medicaids, I think they're only eligible for Medicaid for 9 months, but that allows them to get set up with a PCP, a primary care physician. They will have, for our Afghans, they will have received all of their vaccines on base. So COVID vaccine, as well as chickenpox, MMR, all the vaccines that we get before we go to school as a child. They're getting all of those on base. Our refugees have to get those at the Refugee Health Center after they arrive. And for them, the COVID vaccine is voluntary. I can't think of the right word. Optional. Refugees will apply for a Social Security card. Right now, our Afghans don't have a legal path to citizenship. They are here on a visa. We also make sure that they sign a lease, that the utilities are in their name. Clothing, we're just making sure that they have seasonally appropriate clothing. So during the Christmas holiday season, we're going to be soliciting coat donations, because we want to make sure every person that's arrived this year receives a winter coat. I was explaining this earlier about how, if you've got a family of 5 or 7, Winter coats can be expensive. If you know where to shop and you know how to shop the deals, like Kohl's Bucks or Old Navy always has a really good sale, then you can manage getting a warm coat for not that expensive. But last year when I was trying to buy coats for our families that we didn't get enough coats donated, I thought just go to Walmart. Walmart's generally the cheapest, right? And they were more expensive at Walmart than some of the sales I had been able to shop at. And most of our immigrants are not going to know that. And that can be a huge expense for a family that really pushes them outside of what they're able to afford. So you're going to start seeing some communication from us for what we call Hope Tree. And that's our holiday gift giving program, where we're going to solicit a coat for every person that's arrived this year. So that, and that's 86 people since October 1st. But that includes everyone who's come since last Christmas. Also, health screening. We enroll everyone in English, or the adults in English. We are enrolling kids in school. We have 30 days. So sometimes families are eager to get their kids in school, and it's helpful to have them understand it takes time. We will do that, but there's like a process. There's a lot that has to be done. For our refugees, they have to have completed their vaccines, and that takes a couple of weeks. And we'll do a job orientation. We make sure that at least one person in the family has a job. So going back to that Medicaid, it'll expire after 9 months, which is why we're making sure that we place them in a job that they can receive benefits for their family, and help them understand that the pay will fluctuate. Right now we're in a good, most people are paying good rates, but helping immigrants understand the concept of benefits, and that is a part of your salary. And it's a huge part, because they might be able to go find a cash paying job or a painting or labor job with someone in their community. But we really discourage that. One, because they're going to have to pay taxes and they don't know or understand how to keep that, withhold that. Two, they lose the benefits for their family, and that's really important. So that's something I have volunteers. If you hear that a family is not happy about, usually they're in some type of assembly line job up here in Atlanta. There's like a lot of chicken plants or factory work. That's really beneath them, to tell you the truth. Not only have they lost their home, their family, a lot of them, now they're essentially losing their identity by having to work a job that is essentially beneath them. So oftentimes they'll talk about, like, my feet hurt, my back hurts, like I can't work this job. And that's valid. I'm sure their feet do hurt. I'm sure their back does hurt. It's just part of the process. And it's easier to find a job while you have a job. So if they could stay in the job for a year, then it's so much easier for them to move into another job. We tell them focus on learning English. If there are any certifications that they could get in their area, their field of education, where they could potentially move into other jobs, use that time while you're working a job to further yourself to get a different job. All right. Oh, I'm only on, I'm gonna have to move a little faster. All right, so the first 6 to 8 months, like I said, we give them their first job employment, but we're hoping that they're gonna move to self-sufficiency and move to a job that they prefer. Hopefully they're, adjusting culturally, they're connecting to other immigrants in their community, and they're starting to feel like they're contributing members of their community. All right, so the RCA, what we call welcome money? It's a one-time grant. 90-day money, welcome money, RCA. It's all the words we use to talk about this one-time initial amount of money that we get for each person. That covers the household items that we're required to put in their apartment that we don't get. Like, we have to have 1 cup, plate, fork, spoon, like that for each person. We have to have a lamp in every room that doesn't have an overhead light. So in a lot of apartments, actually, you don't have overhead lights. You have to have lamps. You have to have a dining room table with a chair for each person. So 2 chairs if it's a family of 2, or 7 chairs if it's a family of 7. We usually will put actually the plastic folding tables and metal folding chairs if we don't have stuff donated, because a lot of times we don't want to spend, not a lot, always, we don't want to be spending the family's money making stylistic choices for them when they may not even want a dining room table. Maybe they want to roll out a mat and sit on the floor. So we spend as little as possible providing these things so that we can give them whatever is left, and they can then take it to do with what they want. But this is also buying some basic groceries to be in their apartment when they first arrive. We're doing their utility deposit, their first month's water bill, and then their rent for the first few months until they get a job and they can pay for it themselves. We are not allowed to get beds donated, so we have to provide new mattresses and pillows for everyone. All right. Let's talk about what we do. So RMP, resettlement and placement, is what we've been talking about. Finding the apartment, getting a caseworker, helping them find a job, enrolling kids in school. That's all RMP. We do the cultural orientation classes I talked about. We do have employment services. We're trying to find at least one person in the family, at least, if not every eligible working person, every eligible person working. In Atlanta, we have, Atlanta and Savannah, we have trauma and resiliency youth programs. That's our after school program. So we're still offering it virtually in both locations. So if you want, you can do after school virtual tutoring for our youth. In Atlanta, we have intensive case management. We're hiring for that position in Savannah, and social adjustment services. Both of those are case management after their initial 90-day period. Or anyone who has been here in the last, I believe, 5 years can enroll in that program if they have like a medical need that comes up, or they lose their job, or adjustment in status, like their visa status, or if they got a divorce, any kind of life-changing event, they can come to us and say, I don't know how to navigate this. Most often it's medical. They find out they have high blood pressure, or people are diagnosed with cancer, things like that, and they don't know how to navigate our medical system. So they can get a case manager that'll come alongside them to help them with those things. The other example of that is our refugees who are coming from countries where the learning curve is really severe. We're talking about you're coming from countries that they didn't have running water or access to electricity, doors that locked, things like that. So everything is new to them. And they need way more than 90 or 180 days to learn everything that they need to learn to be successful here in the US. They can be enrolled in intensive case management for a year. So they get a caseworker with them for a year, and the caseworker identifies certain goals that they want that family to achieve. It could be just knowing their address could be one of the goals, being able to read and write it or say it if they called 911. I had a youth with mental disabilities or challenges that the family's goal was to have him responsible for his own hygiene. And so they worked that entire year to teach him how to handle and manage his own hygiene. So these are examples of goals that you could have in intensive case management or social adjustment. And Match Grant Early Self-Sufficiency is a grant, I think I'll talk about a little bit more later, but I'll just go ahead here now in case I need to skip it later on. So Match Grant is a grant that we receive every year from the federal government. It's a certain amount of money that we get to use to enroll clients. We are with them for 90 days. We provide case services for 90 days. Unless they're enrolled in Match Grant, then we get to do case services for 180 days. So we double that amount of time with them. But we're required to match the amount of money that they give us in volunteer hours and gifts in kind. So we're going to ask you guys to record your hours and log your hours because they're extremely valuable towards this grant. Neither Lindsay and I are evaluated on number of volunteers or volunteer hours. We don't get performance reviews on that. But if we're asking for your hours at the end of the month, or we're kind of like pushing for you to enter them, the reason is we care about the people who are able to enroll in this program. We don't meet the match, the next year we get less money and we get to enroll less clients in it. So that's the motivation behind us really pushing to remind you to log your hours. All right, so let's take a second to go over the APA program. This is the suggested service line. So I just went over in the first 24 hours and 30 days and 6 months to a year. This gives you, it's very similar. It's just that we have within the first 24 hours, housing, food, triaging urgent medical needs. The first 5 days, we're explaining to them their rights, their legal services that are needed. The first 7 days, make sure that they're enrolled in food stamps and things like that. If they walk in, so for walk-in, meaning they weren't assigned to us, we want to make sure that they've got their vaccines and they've applied for the work permit. In the first 10 ways, we're enrolling them in English, providing employment services, things like that. And then again, within 30 days, we're doing that school enrollment and enrolling them in any other programs, making sure they're getting cultural orientation. And this is suggested timeline, but basically this allows us to follow the same timeline as our refugees and immigrants. All right, I wanted to spend just a second and kind of give a caveat on our unaccompanied minor program. We have 2 programs under that, I guess, department. Well, it's still a program. Safe release support and home study post-release. The only unaccompanied minors that we are working with in Atlanta and Savannah at this time are kids who are separated at our southern border. LIRS, Lutheran Immigration Refugee Services, does have an unaccompanied minor program for refugees and Afghan immigrants who are separated. We do not have that program here in Atlanta or Savannah. We're only working with kids separated at the southern border. So we provide fingerprint background checks and do home study and things like that in order to get these kids placed in homes and out of detention housing facilities. Let's see. Okay, so when you're working with an immigrant, it's important to understand your foundation as a American-born person and your culture, your inherent culture. It's great to help. These are things you can talk about, but it's really important for you to at least acknowledge them. That in America, we prize equality and independence and individualism, success and hard work, truth and honesty. You know, a lot of our Asian cultures do not prize truth, right? It's more important to them to save face and not embarrass you than it would be to tell you the truth and what they would deem embarrass you because you were wrong. We're very time oriented. You know, I'm scheduling things 2.5 weeks away for 30 minutes on Wednesday, whereas a lot of cultures are relational. And so they'll spend more time together and not worry about, oh, I was supposed to go meet someone else, or I was supposed to go to work, or I have to go to an appointment. So we have to help them understand that time and being on time matters in the US. That's something that really has to be taught, excuse me. Privacy, and we're very informal here, again, with the personal hygiene. I'm going to skip this. So as volunteers, what are some important things to keep in mind? Set appropriate boundaries. It's okay to say no. I want to say that our immigrants and our refugees are extremely resourceful. They have made it here. They have arrived because they persevered and because they didn't take no for an answer. Many of them have had to do things over and over and over again and ask a different person and a different person and a different person the same question until they got a different answer. And you might find that, especially if you're working in a team environment, if you're working with a team, that every person in that team might get asked for an iron. Even though one person said, I'll bring it the next time I'm coming, but the next time's not till next month, then every person might get asked. So it's really important that the team is communicating and saying, hey, so-and-so said that they were hoping that we could bring them an iron, or that they wanted to go to the store to get an iron. I'm going to be doing that. Or can anyone do that the next time they go? Same thing with financial involvement. A goal is self-sufficiency. So we don't want you giving money directly to them. You're welcome to donate to Inspiritus, and we can make sure that money gets to them, but we want to empower them to provide for their needs. So we don't want to enable them to quit that job they don't like, right? We want them to keep working there and pursuing other options. So they might ask you for money, and then ask the next person for money, and the next person for money, and you might be like, gosh, it would be so hard for me to ask and be told no. So I'd rather just not ask. I find that in other cultures, they have no problem just asking. I also, as far as like giving things, going back to the iron, I think in that specific case, you can you can use your discernment. I might say, I can take you to Goodwill the next time we're here. And you can buy, so you can buy an iron. I might try to find a way, or like if it's a clothing item, let me see if we can find a clothing closet or something like that. Because what you don't want to do is set up the Santa Claus mentality where they're just constantly asking you for stuff, and every time you come, you're bringing it. Every time you come, you're bringing something. What you want to build a relationship. So you got to figure out a way to keep that a mutual relationship. What are they teaching you? What are they showing you? What are they giving you? How can it be a give and take and not just you giving and just them taking? Because that's not going to be sustainable and it's not helpful. Public transit versus driving clients. Lindsay and I actually were talking about this the other day, because I really push for people to learn how to use public transportation. But there are times when they need help being transported somewhere, or that we might ask, hey, are there any volunteers available to take them somewhere? I just think that the reason I give that example is you're always wanting to be thinking about how you can work yourself out of a job. You're not going to always be there for them. So if you could ride with them to an appointment on public transportation, even if that's something you've never done before, you could learn, that's great. Or if you're sitting next to them at an appointment and you're filling out their paperwork for them, having them do it with you, or look and like show them, saying wanting your name, your date of birth. If you could work together to like help them fill it out, just be thinking about what would happen if you're not there next time, because it's not sustainable for you to think that you could do it every time for them. So if you want to take them somewhere, you fill something out, that's fine. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying try to have the mentality of what would this look like if I wasn't here to help, because I'm not always going to be here. And they're going to have to learn how to do it on their own at some point. It's also helpful to remember there's two sides to every story. I guarantee you they're going to complain. At this point, if you're working with Afghans, they're going to complain. It's not what they thought. It's not what they expected. We're not what they expected. And there's two sides to every story. Same time, we're human. We make mistakes. We're overwhelmed. We're doing the best we can. Maybe we told them we'd take them to an appointment and completely forgot. So if you hear something, just go back to Lindsay and be like, hey, last time I visited, this is what they were telling me. And Lindsay can go to our staff and say, hey, this was brought up. And it can either, most often our staff has told me, I know I've talked to them about that 4 times. Here's what I said. And that's an example of them just trying to ask somebody else to get a different answer. But sometimes I've gone back to our staff and they've been like, oh man, that was my mistake, my bad. And it was good to know, because then we can fix it. So just kind of weighing that there's two sides to every story, and what you're hearing may not be the whole story. Back to just avoiding an unhealthy reliance. Emotionally, financially, transportation, paternalism. You don't want to set up this unequal balance of power or authority. I put the cell phone on there because this actually just happened tonight. People from other cultures and countries have no problem calling over and over and over and over and over again. I think it's a great idea for you to exchange numbers, so you can text them, say, I'm coming to visit, are you going to be home? They can text or call you. But when someone calls me over and over again, like from America, my husband's like, it must be an emergency. Like they would not have called 3 times unless it was an emergency. And if it's my work phone, I'm like, let me just see the number. No, not an emergency. If it's an emergency, they need to call 911, and they know that. But it's just culturally, I lived in South India for a while, and we had this, it was called missed call, and the only person paying for the phone call was the person who made the phone call. So we would do something called missed call so that you would pay for the call. You would call back and you'd be on your dime. And especially in like relationships, people would be like, give me a missed call. Like essentially I'm offering to pay for this phone call. And so I find that similarly in a lot of cultures, people will just call and call and call and call, assuming that like if they're the one who call, if you answer when they're calling, it's on their dime. But you can set up boundaries around that. Don't feel like you need to answer, late hours or whenever is, early hours, whatever. You can tell them, please don't call me after this time or before this time. It's something that they may have to learn. That's self-explainable. If you say you're going to show up, please stick to it. They may not always be there, but it's the only way to teach them, is to do what you say you're going to do. Be ready to separate them from them when they feel self-sufficient. We're not in this to save them, for them to be reliant on us. The goal is that they would be able to do things on their own. And maybe that happens sooner than I had this happen with a team the other day, where the husband had found another job on his own. He was just doing everything the volunteers said they were going to do when they got there. He had already handled. He had already done it, and they were offended. They were hurt and offended, and I had to say, this is the best case scenario. He is doing well. He's thriving. Very soon after he arrived. This is great. This is not a bad thing. This is the end goal. This happened really soon. Document your hours, your mileage, and any donations. Respect the language and culture. Pay attention to meanings of gesture. We prefer, and this is really easy with COVID, but you not touch, especially cross-gender. Take your shoes off when you go in. Even if they're like, no, I think it's still a good idea to. They're probably just being polite. But if you see a pile of shoes by the door, then you should add your shoes to it. Speak clearly and correctly. Pause between words. You don't have to talk louder. That's not going to help them understand you better. They're not, deaf. But just speak in full, simple, short sentences. Be willing to repeat it. If you're going to use children to help you translate, be really cognizant of, is this a conversation I would have with a child? Avoid medical conversations, financial conversations. You can't guarantee that child is interpreting it correctly. So also understand that it may not be a reliable translation. I prefer to use Google Translate or try to call a friend of theirs. I was in a home of a client yesterday, and he just called a friend of his. If you can get that friend's number and call them the next time you're there, that's awesome. You can, depending on the language, a lot of times you can text them and it'll translate automatically. They'll receive it in the text of their language, and then they can respond. There will most likely be a language barrier. With our Afghans, a lot of the Afghan men speak English. A lot of them have worked for the U.S. military as interpreters. So that's possible that you'll have someone in the family that speaks English, but also it's possible that you won't. Try to seek understanding of their culture. Be sensitive to, dress. So in a lot of cultures, shoulders and knees are actually very sensual, more so than the midriff. So I always have something like this that I throw on if I'm going to meet with a refugee or immigrant, and make sure my knees are covered. No proselytizing. I actually was on with a community group earlier, a missions team from a church, and I was helping them understand that we want love by our actions. I thought of the scripture that said, they will know you by your love, but the way you act. And especially with our Afghan clients, their trauma is very recent. They've very recently experienced a trauma, and I was thinking through, if I experienced a traumatic experience, as a person of faith, my faith would be what carried me through. It would be what I relied on to get me through the most difficult time in my life. And what if I did that and got to, another country, and then people tried to change my beliefs to believe what they believed in that country? You would be asking me to give up. Already I've lost a lot of my family, my identity, my job, my house, my culture, and now you're wanting me to abandon my faith, the one thing that carried me through, the one thing that's consistent that I still have that's not been taken from me. And so I think it's helpful if you can view it from that perspective, that you wouldn't want to take that from them. And so just respect it, honor it. If you want to ask questions about it, that's great. You can share what you believe. But really, I just say to keep religion off the table. Truthfully, especially with Afghan clients, they will just ask you to not come back. So if you want to build a relationship and you want to build a friendship, then keeping religion just out of the conversation is going to be the way to build a friendship, because otherwise I've had people pushed out the door and the door closed and said, please do not come back. And that's not what you want. And that's not what's really best for them. I could get on my high horse about this, but I'm not, because it's already 7:30. Don't ask about their story, especially with Afghans. I know that you're going to want to know. I've got a volunteer who asked me today, was like, I bet I could get so many donations if I could share with them a family story. But the thing is, they have experienced a trauma, even our refugees, not just our Afghans, but Afghans, it's very fresh and recent in their mind. And so if you ask them, you could be triggering something that they're not prepared to process, and you're not prepared to walk them through that process. Unless you are, a trauma, trained therapist, which I am not, you don't want to get into that. Also, it's not your right to know. That's something that you just learn as you get to know someone. But to think you could walk into someone's home and after 3 visits get to know one of the deepest things about them is, I understand why we want to know, and I understand we're coming from a good place. But if you think about it objectively, that's really audacious to think that you would just get to know that something that intimate about someone. So just leave it. Don't ask questions about what happened. You can ask about their food. You can ask about their faith. I just think that that's potentially leading you to a closed door. Ask about their culture. Ask about where they're from. Ask about what they like to do. Do they like sports? Have they ever seen snow? Like, there are things that you can talk about, and you're going to have a language barrier. So also they're going to be trying to explain, if you were to ask about their story, explain it in the language that's foreign to them. So just kind of stay away from that. If you want to learn about more about different cultures, where they're coming from, the conflict, this Cultural Orientation Resource Center is a great resource website. I'm going to kind of breeze through these things so we can get done. But we have tools if you're working with them on English, conversational English, then moving to reading, listening, writing. It's not required, but it's helpful. Even just conversational English is really helpful if you can work with them on that. You can collaborate with your local library. I want to make sure you understand confidentiality. So, what would you want shared about your own family? I say don't take photos. Don't take photos of faces, especially with our Afghans. There's a huge security threat there. You can take pictures of a teacup or, something that if you want to post about what you're doing, you can talk about working with immigrants, working with Afghans, tell positive stories, especially around the Thanksgiving table. I think that's a really wonderful thing to do. Change their names, don't talk about where they live, and don't share photos online. But we're, specifically in regards to their documents, their health and financial information, all of that is confidential. We've already talked about this. I'm just going to kind of move through. Let's get to the logistics. So we ask that you when we say fill out an application, you register as a volunteer on our My Volunteer page. Congratulations, check the box. Number 2, you've attended a volunteer training. We ask that you would donate and donate for the background check and complete that. And then let me go back to, I think I need to move this up in the PowerPoint, but please let us know if you find out about any financial hardships, any safety concerns, especially like domestic violence, alcohol abuse, things like that. If they're considering a big job change or a big life change, like quitting their job or moving, just let us know so we can be involved in that process. Any health or mental concerns, like I said, you're the first eyes in there. So if you notice that they're sleeping all the time or crying or they seem to be depressed, let us know so that we can help make sure that they get the attention that they need. And I said, abuse or neglect, please make sure you're sharing that with us. Universal health precautions, this used to scare a lot of people off. Now we've lived 20 months in a pandemic, but don't come in contact with blood or bodily fluids without gloves on. We're not talking about people who are dirty or diseased. I'm just saying you never know. And so you should always don't change diapers, scraped knees, bloody noses, things like that. Just kind of direct them to the mom or dad or sibling and let them handle it. I would say a couple of grocery bags, but that was specifically for if you're transporting clients, they often can get motion sickness. And so I think it's great just to have those in your car. That's really more for our interns and our volunteers. Let us know if you are wanting to drive. We want to make sure that we have you submit a motor vehicles check in addition to the background check. And this is what I want to make sure. This is the last thing I want to camp out on. The value of your volunteer hours. So your hours are actually valued at $25.15 an hour that you've donated. And your miles are 58 cents a mile. That all goes towards that matching grant, but only if we have it logged, only if we have it recorded. So we want to make sure if you volunteer that you get that time logged. You can do it at the end of the month. You don't have to do it after every visit, but I think it's often easier to forget if you wait. We will send you a reminder, but please just make sure you're logging your hours. And here's an example of what it looks like to log your hours. You're going to go to the My Volunteer page and click on the Hours tab. Thank you, Lindsay. Hours. There's a drop down here. This list will be based on what you're doing. So we assign this list to you. So you'll see whether you're employment coach or first friend, which is what most people are. But if you help set up an apartment, or you went and helped pick up donations, or you're working in the after school program, kind of whatever it is, that should be there for you to choose. Then you're going to come in here, you're going to put the date, how many hours, if you donated any items to the family, how many miles you drove. If you did donate something, if you'll list it there, because that's gifts in kind, we can include that too. Although I said I'd rather you donate it to us and let us give it to them. I know there are times that it is appropriate to give directly to the family. Just include that so we can make sure it gets recorded. And you don't have to fill this out if you're busy. This section, like the volunteer comments and the description of the donation, it's helpful. It's helpful for us to know what's going on, what a volunteer did, but it's not necessary. This is kind of a way for you to communicate with us. But if all you can do is log your hours and your miles, that's sufficient. That's the most important, right? And then you can save and log another or save. Okay, so it is 7:37 on the night of Game 1 of the World Series. So if you would like to hop off and get your pregame on, you're welcome to. But I do want to stay on for about 10 minutes probably and offer an opportunity for people to ask questions. And in case you came in late, let me just revisit introductions. I'm Sarah Burke. I'm in our Atlanta office. We've got Lindsay Grovenstein. She is the volunteer specialist in our Savannah office. So you may have been coordinating with one or both of us.
This is Eric. I did have one question, and that was during the 30-day, do you have a 30-day training outline for clients so that we would know what you told them?
Yeah, so we go over that on like what to expect on that 24-hour home visit, and we use an interpreter during that time, but we don't give them any of that in writing because it would be in English. But I can send you this entire PowerPoint if you'd like.
You said for us to, back up. If you
yes, the cultural orientation. I'm sorry, I misunderstood. Yes, Lindsay, do you mind making a note that I would love to send that out? We have a curriculum of what. Thank you. I misunderstood what you're saying. Of what content we cover for our cultural orientation.
Very good.
Thank you, Eric, for clarifying.
And just, Kathy, I saw what you said. We'll send this PowerPoint for everybody so that you can reference it.
Yeah, we'll send it out tomorrow. Okay, well then I'll let you guys go and you can follow up to either Lindsay or I. Me if you're in Atlanta, Lindsay if you're in Savannah. It doesn't hurt to send it to either one of us. We'll get it to the other person. Don't worry. We talk almost every day. So I'll let everybody go. But if you think of questions later that you're like, oh man, I wish I had asked that, just shoot us an email, okay? Thank you guys for your time. I really appreciate being here.
Yes, don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions. Yeah, actually, Shawnee, we are looking at getting donations for Halloween candy for our kids. We have about 30 kids total, and so we're trying to find stuff. We've had a few people drop off candy, but you can text me and we can figure out a drop-off time and get that from you.
Awesome. All right, well, you guys have a good night.
Thank you. We'll be in touch.
Mm-hmm.